Good morning, people. I finished a book. Back in Florida, and I have finished a book. I started this book when I was in Michigan. It was on my shelf there, and I believe that I've never read this book. I've had it for such a long time that it's got one of my stickers in here that says "From the Library of," and I've signed the thing, so I've had this book for 20 years and 20 plus years and never read it. It's actually a really good book. It's kind of a weird book because this thing was published in 1944 while Adolf Hitler was still very much alive. And the book only runs to very early in 1934, so it just shows Hitler's rise to power. 774 pages, very small print, and I don't like reading that. I think maybe that's one of the reasons why it took me so long to finish it, is because the goddamn print was so small. And also I was traveling, I was between houses when I started it, and come back here, and I go back to work here, so it takes me a little bit longer to finish something. Just a word, I did not start reading this book so that I could find comparisons between the rise of National Socialism and the rise of Trumpism. That happened while I was reading the book. It's undeniable that somebody in the Trump organization, probably somebody like Bannon, has read these books and uses some of the systematic capturing of people's minds, because as I went through this thing, I kept finding more and more things that are exactly what is happening now. Anyways, let's get to my notes. In 1923, there's the beer hall push, and I just, while I was reading that, I'm like, okay, who's going to put a fucking stop to this? Finally, the Munich police fire on these people. Come pretty close to actually, there's a bullet fired that hits the guy next to Hitler, and another 3.5 feet, that bullet could have hit Hitler right between the eyes, and this would be a very different world. The Munich police that fired on these people are heroes. There should be statues of them somewhere. And in my notes here, I compare whoever fired those bullets to the guy that fired the bullet at the Capitol insurrection. He's also, in my eyes, very much a hero. In 1929, the SS is formed. So this is a long time after the SA is formed. The book follows Hitler and his people, Himmler, Hess, Göring, Goebbels. It follows all these people. Strasser, Rome. Rome is the SA guy. And the book culminates with the SS arresting a lot of the SA leaders. This happened late 1933, early 1944. That's where the book ends, and it's pretty horrible what they do. There's arrests, murders. Nobody knows how many people are murdered. They just throw them in jail. Sometimes they fire right through the jail cell window and kill them like that. Sometimes they stand them up against a wall. Obviously, that hasn't happened yet here in American politics, but we do have people like Kyle Rittenhouse that can travel somewhere with the express wish to murder somebody, and then get away with it. We have laws in states that make it legal to run over protesters, and We all know which protesters they're going to run over. I mean, Hitler, he starts out blaming the Jews for everything. But then he moves to the communists and he blames them for everything. We're kind of doing that here. You know, we call Democrats communists. People don't even understand what communists are. My note here says so much of Hitler's procedure screams out Trump. No way this is just parallel evolution. Someone has studied this. And let's make this clear here. I'm not saying that Trump is like Hitler. That actually is insulting to Hitler. Hitler was a maniac, but he was a brave man. I mean, he served in the military. Throughout the book, Hitler himself will rush into somewhere where somebody is giving a speech, attack the speechmaker with a baseball bat, fire a pistol into the ceiling. I don't think Trump has that in his DNA. I think Trump would have somebody else do that for him. And I also say that I'm not a Hitler fan. Do not get this idea, but you can also say nice things about Hitler. Hitler was an animal lover. Trump is just too jealous of a person to have an animal there that might get some of his attention. And then, my next notice says Trump and Hitler are very different people. Hitler also grew up being very poor. Both men were pathological liars. I own a copy of Mein Kampf, but I've never read that book. And this author here says don't even fucking bother reading it because Hitler just lies throughout the whole thing. They're pathological liars. Okay. Both men never read very much. Hitler gets in trouble early on because there's a guy named Bloomberg that writes a book that's supposed to outline the National Socialism. Bloomberg actually gives a copy of the book to Hitler to read for his approval. Hitler has it for a year and never reads it. And then Bloomberg gets the thing published. And the book ends up attacking the Catholic Church a lot, and Hitler's got to do a bunch of damage control after that. Page 368. I do a little bit of reading here. This is going to be a kind of a long video. But how did the armed intellectuals come to submit to the leadership of this raving dervish? For when success brought masses to the party, men rose to the leadership who far excelled Hitler in practical ability, education, and character. It can be understood how the phenomenon subjected the masses. His hypnotic effect on certain individuals must be accepted as a fact. But by what human means did Hitler handle the men around him? The answer is that he did not handle them successfully. These men never ceased to laugh at him or become enraged against him, and in between, reluctantly to admire his amazing political success. I mean, who the fuck does that sound like? Bottom of 375 and 376. Years later, a Polish journalist, by way of testing his learning, asked him frankly, "What great minds of the past have exerted a decisive influence on your excellency in an intellectual sense?" Hitler replied, "It is hard to list the number of those minds in the past which have furnished fertilizing contributions to every great idea. Our whole body of views arises in overwhelming part from the results of the intellectual work of the past, and in smaller part on the basis of our own discoveries." Does anybody recall when Trump was asked, "What great books have you read?" He couldn't name them. Just like Hitler there couldn't name any of the great minds that have influenced him. Although Hitler uses a much more expansive vocabulary. They're both insomniacs. The brown shirts, which are the SA, were in large part supported by the state. They intended to overthrow, apparently, I did not finish that note. Top of page 519. I either didn't finish that note or I misplaced it. By the dark winter of 1932, the primitive delight in power of most German politicians had long since turned to terror. That is why the social democratic leaders, resigned and weary, had allowed themselves to be forced out of their positions of power in Prussia with an indifference which would have been unthinkable 5 years before. We have the same thing happening here, where people that are doing a good job, conscientious people, are actually quitting politics and just getting out. In 1933, Hitler becomes chancellor, and he renounces his salary, which eventually they decide that he can't do. By law, he can't do that. But who else? Who else do we know that renounced their salary? And the people eat that shit up. 559. I got some reading. I really, struggled with this because I thought, am I just imagining this? Am I inventing these similarities? But no, I'm not. Today it is as good as proved that the Reichstag fire was not the communist crime which the National Socialists made of it. And keep in mind that today, that's in 1944. It is not quite so clear who really did set the fire and how. For the work of a single individual, the preparations were too extensive. It may be assumed that the incendiaries were close to the National Socialists, but their identity and methods have remained unknown. The world was duped with all sorts of documents, a number of them presumably manufactured by the National Socialists themselves, to create confusion. Supposed confessions of the incendiaries were offered for sale, and the forgeries were not always very competent. The irrefutable document in the case, however, is that which is not produced. Göring's material from the Karl Liebknecht house. Even after the fire, this is from my notes here, even after the fire, the majority of Germans are against National Socialism. Just like here. The majority of our citizens are against Trumpism. Oh, okay, so, and this is just a little bit about the book itself. Page 624 and 625 are still joined at the bottom. I have left a page, 636, I gotta find it, and 637. I very laboriously read this page without splitting the bottom. And this is what I mean. These pages are joined at the bottom, right here. It must have been how they printed books at this time. I ended up finding about 10 of them that were still joined at the bottom. So it's telling me that at least up to page 624, somebody may have been reading this book, but at page 624, they had stopped either there or before there. And here I have the name Georgy Dimitrov, and he was one of the guys that they blamed for the Reichstag fire, and he's just an interesting character. He goes to trial, and he also, he's his own defense at the trial. He's a pretty interesting character, Dimitrov. Google his name, and you'll see a little bit about the trial. He has interactions with Göring at the trial, and Göring threatens him. Apparently he says to Goring, "I'm not afraid of you," and Goring says, "You will be after this trial." He's going to murder him. That's what he's threatening to do. Murder squads is my next note. We haven't really got there. Rittenhouse is the beginning of that shit. The laws that allow you to drive through protesters is the beginning of that shit. And then I skip all the way to almost the end of the book. Fourth paragraph, 767. I really should read the end of the book, too. Like the last 2 pages. 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, yeah, I like to read gruesome paragraphs, and this is the gruesome paragraph. This is about the SA leaders being arrested for nothing. I mean, they trump up charges. The shots, from a distance of 5 to 6 yards, tore out the flesh of the victims, especially the spot where the bullet left the body under the left shoulder was transformed into a gaping hole, and the bullets dragged out parts of the body. The observers in the cellar could see bloody pieces of flesh stuck to the wall after the victims had dropped, and the darker heart fragments were clearly discernible. The wall was not cleaned in the intervals between the executions. Hence, after a short time, it was completely covered with blood and human flesh. Third paragraph, 772, and we are almost done. 1, 2, 3. The belief in the necessity of evil, which slumbers in the lowest depths of the human soul, had been awakened by Hitler as by no other man in the history of Europe. The fact that he could do what he had done seemed like a confirmation of Hesse's fanatical words, that through Hitler higher powers were fulfilling man's destiny. Hitler now began to do frightful things easily, and the more frightful they were, the more easily he did them. He discovered the secret law of history, which has made all bloody figures like himself bigger than life size when the times were favorable. The law by which the most horrible deeds become less heavy to bear, the more monstrous and numerous they are. Because in the end, each horror wipes out its predecessor in the minds of the people. The Trump administration just went from one fucked up thing to another. And we all wondered, why isn't something being done? That's why. Will it ever catch up to him? It caught up to Hitler. Again, these are two very different people. Trump is more like a stooge that is allowed to behave at the whim of somebody else. I would say Bannon. Bannon is more like the evil genius to me. Thanks for watching.